This is the Linefeed reading list for December 2009 and January 2010. So first for the new decade and last for the old decade. And I've mushed them together because pretty much Christmas just took over everything. I didn't get any time to do one of these for December, and it tends to be a quiet time for magazines anyway. So I had a bit of a breather back with seven or eight? Yeah, eight magazines, starting with Film Comment, which is produced in part by the, it says published by the Film Society of Lincoln Center, which is, I don't know what that is, it's some sort of place in America that specializes in film, I guess. But it's kind of interesting because it's one of these magazines that's available on newsstands but is associated with sort of a sort of community-based organization, I guess. And it's kind of interesting looking at these magazines because they get to do a few things that other magazines don't get to do. For a start, they can be quite scholarly and can take time with articles and you know, are quite comfortable with writing essays about things and not having to sort of sell everything on every page, which is kind of nice for a change, you know. It's I mean, you could see it as dull, but you could also see it as quite refreshing, which is what I thought. I picked it up pretty much and I was like, I've been wanting to buy it for a while. It just seems to have every film I want to know about in it, and it's not badly written. I mean, it's a little scholarly, but it's not too crazy. Really good reviews. It's got a section about film festivals and how they're going. And just really sort of cleanly designed, no mess, no fuss, really. Like I said, refreshing, not amazingly exciting, but definitely worth picking up. Moving swiftly on to Death+Taxes. I don't know did we feature this? This is pretty much the issue I wanted to feature if I did feature one last time, but this is the one I wanted to because it's meant to be their interactive issue. But I have to admit I didn't really find much compulsion to actually interact with it. The idea was that there's all these little icons and stuff sprinkled throughout. Oh, Wheel of Suck, it's like something that they credit as being like something they've invented, and it's quite cool. Apparently there's a few imitators around it, I haven't seen any myself. But yeah, this whole interactive thing was like you take a picture of something on the page and then you send it via text or email to this address, and then they send you some content back, which kind of seemed a bit convoluted to me, not very instant. And I can imagine a few people sort of doing what I did and going, oh, I can't be arsed. But on the same hand, there's probably a few people that did, but it wasn't very instant. But again, this is it's not an outrageous magazine at all. I mean, it's quite conservatively designed. They leave some nice space for sort of hand-drawn headings and stuff, which is quite cool. And there's some really like nice sort of inventive photography. But again, it's just a really refreshing sort of no mess, no fuss sort of magazine with some quite interesting bands in it. The layouts, yeah, again, very clean. This one featured a sort of fashion thing with a band called Yacht, who I went to see recently in Melbourne and am now a big fan of. They're so cool, and they're so the graphic designers band. If you have a look at any of their videos or anything like that, you'll totally get what I'm talking about. And quite funny to see them sort of pulling faces in a fashion spread, because they're quite sort of loose on stage, I guess. Yeah, one of the other things I like about this magazine is that it's a music magazine, but they'll then flip into like articles about politics or the future or like things that are quite serious in a way, but they give it all, it's the mixture that makes it a bit more interesting. I grabbed ID because I think this might be the last issue, and I really want to see what happens when a magazine knows that it's going to close and what happens that final issue. And it's a bit of a shame because they could have gone out with a bang, but instead they've used it to promote a lot of the magazines published by the same company. And this is part of the criticism levelled at the publishing house that bought ID about 10 years ago, is that they couldn't work out how to sell it and kind of lost interest in the title. and rather than selling it on or letting somebody else run it, they ran it into the ground. And that's the impression you get from listening to the comments of staff and members and things like that. And it was a highly respected magazine. This is a page where the publishers have decided to try and flog a few of their own wares. There's some terrible thing called mydesignshop.com. Really horrible convoluted name with a really nasty logo, which is apparently where you're meant to go for all your design publication things now that they don't have to spend any money on ID. So a bit of a sad tale, that one. Wallpaper. What is this? Oh, it's augmented reality. If you haven't heard about this, it's a thing where you can point your camera. Do you point your camera? Your camera in your computer at these sort of funny blocks. There's one there it's these funny sort of almost barcodey like graphics, and some amazing crazy 3D rendered thing happens in your computer. This is the first time I've actually bothered to check out this augmented reality thing. I have to say, I don't know if it's just the way Wallpaper did it or not, but I found it quite lackluster. It didn't really thrill me. I'm sure there's some applications where it's really cool and really useful, but that just didn't do it for me. Yeah, I was very skeptical. I had to point this out too because James Murdoch is listed as one of the judges in their design awards as well, which is kind of funny that he's like so into getting people to pay for content and yet he's giving up his time to be a judge in a competition for probably, they owned by Murdoch and Murdoch Company. Time Life, is that Murdoch? I've lost track of all that. IPC, who owns that? I don't know. The Wallpaper promotions team too have been doing some interesting stuff, turning kind of crap products into something that looks kind of interesting. I mean, that's a really ugly car they've managed to sort of make a bit interesting and putting it on different glossy stock and all this sort of stuff. There's a Timberland boot that they've managed to make a whole double page spread out of. And looking good. I mean, it's better than having just a bog standard ad, really. And a bit more subtle than the way Monocle have been doing their advertorials, really. Last time we looked at Mark, which is actually Frame came first. Frame's an interior design magazine, and then Mark is an architecture magazine which came from the same publishers. And their formats have become very similar in recent times. I'm pretty sure they're both designed by different design teams. But pretty much what this publishing house do is they get a new bunch of designers to design their magazines every few years. So when a design team takes it on, they know they're going to be there for a certain amount of time, and it's kind of cool because then you can follow the lineage of the magazine, and it adds a layer of like, not only do you get sort of to see all the different design trends, but you also get a layer of like graphic design trends on top as you see the different design teams take on the magazine. And this time around it's really clean with some really lovely sort of tidy typography. And it sounds like I'm getting quite conservative in this new decade. I'm going for like really clean, crisp looking things at the moment. I'll have to find something completely messy to throw myself off at some point. But yeah, there's some great stuff in there. You get to see inside YCN's head offices in London, and there's more about YCN later on in this video podcast. This is a school full of these crazy Constantine Krylik, can't say his name, chairs, and sort of really ugly typography scattered all over the floor for some reason. This is sort of the most joyless school you've ever seen. They've been doing some advertorials, which is kind of different for them as well. Again, there's sort of opening spreads, so that's really neat. And that image on the left, I think, is actually low res, and they've managed to sort of res it up so it looks a bit interesting. But yeah, what else can I say about Frame? It's just a really lovely, solid magazine, and this is a really good issue as well. There's some really interesting stuff at the back, so crazy stuff. It is weird because Frame and Mark are starting to look quite similar. I wonder if there'll be some sort of change at a later date. And speaking of architecture magazines, this is my fave architecture magazine at the moment. It's called Pinup, and it's kind of it's got a bit of a feel of like Fantastic Man to it. It's almost like like if those guys did an architecture magazine, it would probably end up like this. And I have a feeling they share some correspondence. And it's crazy. It takes architecture as its base, but then it has things like this Blue Door restaurant in London, which has just opened, which is actually another magazine later on as well. And things like, you know, an art installation where someone's made a pretend meth lab, and random photos of Dubai that are shown here. Guy who builds massive sculptures out of paper stuff. They've tried and succeeded in finding different angles on architecture that you haven't seen before, and kind of added a bit of joy to it. It's quite fun, even though the page layouts look quite staid and everything is an aerial. I mean, aerials never look so good, but yeah, crazy. This is a good example of their sort of editorial stance. These are like Italian television presenters. Apparently they're all quite saucy. So they've just sort of cut lots of them out and stuck them on some crazy chairs. Favourite things, which is reminiscent of Self-Service's 100 things that they used to do. There's 25 in this issue, so I'm guessing you have to buy 3 issues to get the whole 75. But again, really nice sort of random selections of stuff, like furniture, but then with heaps of pot plants sort of arranged all over them, and just really lovely random stuff. And not stuffy or staid at all, and finishing with this like just lush pattern, which is probably my favourite page in the whole magazine. This is what sort of reminds me of Fantastic Man a bit, and they also produce Butt magazine. It's a little gay sometimes. This is like a men's retreat with this guy in his knickers sort of lounging around randomly. But yeah, that's Pinup, and I would so recommend it. Really good issue. A really good magazine. So there's a few old ones there. So lovely. Coming up next is a magazine I sort of have a vested interest in, because I designed the first issue for them. Well, it was a long time ago. Like, it's been a long time for them to get this second one out. And this is produced, it's called Ideas Illustrated, and it's produced for YCN to help promote a lot of their illustrators and image makers. So it's sort of irregular, like there's no set sort of time for each one to come out. And hopefully they'll get a bit quicker from now on. This one's designed by a group called Inventory, and what they've done is they've invited an illustrator to pretty much illustrate over the top of the whole magazine. So they've got Jamie Brown in to sort of do all these random illustrations all the way through, and that's the stuff you can see in green there. And another really interesting thing is they've got an advertiser this time, and they've done custom ads for this advertiser to help, you know, get a bit of money into the magazine. And done it in it's a really nice way to handle advertising without having some brand completely take over your magazine. If I have a criticism, the only thing is it feels a bit light on text, and I don't know if it's just because it's the way it looks, but it feels quite lightweight in terms of stuff to read. I mean, there's this great article from Andrew Lazowski, and a few sort of bigger articles at the back, but it's mainly a picture book, and it's my only criticism. It just feels a bit light on text, really, that's it. But apart from that, it's fab, and there's the interiors of the YCN offices, which were also featured in the frame back there. So yeah, really good issue. You should get it if you can. It's available through the YCN website, and I thoroughly recommend it. Ideas Illustrated. I'm going to finish with this is like my grand finale, because I'm so excited about this magazine. It's a food magazine called Fire and Knives, and it's designed by Rob Lowe, known as Super Mundane, who designs Anorak magazine and worked on Sleaze way back when, and Good for Nothing. And it's produced by a new group that he's working with called Present Joys. And it's awesome articles about food and eating and going to dinner, and from an very, very English perspective, but quite wacky. Like, there's this article about cooking with tobacco, and there's an article about this restaurant where at the end of the meal all this stuff comes through the sprinkler system that you can eat, and there's an article about hidden dining rooms in the city, and an article about Vincent Price, who used to do a cooking show and did several cookbooks and all this sort of stuff. It's such a good read. Like it's almost like one of those novels you don't want to put down. Really nice, and it's a lot of text, so they've done really well to sort of make it appealing and make you want to read it. Considering that it's only set in 2 typefaces too the whole way through, Gil and Perpetua. It's really well done, and no obvious ads either, so you don't get that sort of break either. It's just a really solid bit of editorial work, really. Very few pictures too. I've read most of it. I have trouble reading a lot of the magazines I get because there's so many of them. I read bits and bobs of them, but this one I read loads of. I just really loved it, and would thoroughly recommend it, and that's available through Present Joys. So look that up. I'm sure there'll be a link on the blog. Whew, running out of breath, I tell ya. Oh, I wanted to finish with to show you this Lush poster that Jeremy Leslie from Mag Culture sent me during the Christmas break, and it's not only a Lush poster, it's also very useful because it has a link to a map of places to get mags in London. So if you're stuck for somewhere to get magazines, follow the link and you'll be absolutely fine. And I think he's planning on getting other people to do sort of city guides to where to get your mags and stuff as well. Oh, and that's it. That's me done. Roll on February, I guess.